Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video, we'll be taking a look at rogues. Now, a lot of you guys have gotten into Shadowlands expansion and have realized just how insanely fun and amazing Subtlety Rogue is. A lot of people have picked up the spec and even been dominating with it in skirmishes and battlegrounds. Outlaw rogues are still relevant. They're still looking like a very strong contender for Mythic Pluses, and it's going to be a very interesting thing to see subtleties and outlaws clash against each other, just like how it was between Outlaw rogues and Assassination rogues of Battle for Azeroth. And that's going to hit us up with the third spec that I feel like have been sitting in stealth this whole time in Vanish and just hasn't got to open up yet, and that's going to be Assassination. Now, why haven't we seen much of Assassination? And some of you guys have asked me a question, is Assassination a bad spec? In today's video, I kind of want to talk about this lone child that feels kind of abandoned. We got the raids, the Mythic Pluses, and the PvP opening up very soon. And a lot of you guys like to play the specs that you like. There's a reason why I'm a huge fan of Enhancement Shaman, Survival Hunter, Two-Hand Death Knight, and even though I'm most likely not going to play my Demon Hunter that much, I do enjoy the Momentum playstyle for one reason or another. There's always been a spec or a playstyle that I found unique, and I've always enjoyed it. And Assassination might be one of those specs and playstyles that you like. Maybe that's something that you really enjoyed back in Battle for Azeroth, but going into this brand new expansion, you feel like not a lot of people are really playing Assassination. There's guides on subtlety, guides on outlaw, and it feels like Assassination is just kind of empty. So if this is your favorite spec, like some of you guys have come to me asking me, hey, how's this spec doing? Is it on life support? I kind of enjoy playing it. Is it still worth playing it? That's what I really want to talk about in this video. In previous expansions, Assassination has been a spec that generally ends up scaling at a later time. Sometimes Assassination has a really strong start. Like in Legion, it ended up being a really strong spec for PvE as well as in PvP, and then by next or second raid tier, it really started flourishing with a very powerful tier set bonus, and it's always been a very strong spec since then. In Battle for Azeroth, it started out as a very strong spec, a little bit behind your Outlaws for Mythic Pluses, but inside of raids, there was no one that was going to compare with Vendetta. Plus, were we going to play Subtlety as a spec back in BFA? The only thing it could really do, essentially, is do funneling in terms of using the AoE abilities to build up calm points for each enemy it hit, and funneling those calm points into massive eviscerates, which worked for a few fights, allowing Subtlety a spotlight for a month or two before all that completely got stripped, where the spec became very much a meme for PvE. So potentially, Assassination is a spec that is going to simply scale at a later time. It might not be this first raid tier that will start shining super bright, maybe by second, maybe by third raid tier, but eventually the spec will have enough stats in terms of secondaries in particular in order to shine. Talking about stats, let's talk about tuning, and that's something that maybe is just the downfall of the spec for now. As in, we are going to have tuning before this raid, and even after the first week of raiding, when people dive into arenas, when people dive into Mythic Pluses, into heroic raids, we will all get to see which specs are performing well and which ones are underperforming. And Blizzard is going to adjust. They are going to take specs that are overperforming and kind of hamper them down to become more in line with everyone else. And everybody that's doing very poorly are going to get tuned up. So maybe it's just simply a question of tuning, and I feel like that just is going to happen with the Shadowlands beta and alpha as it was. Subtlety as a spec all of a sudden became viable, and Blizzard made some very exciting changes for it, so of course a lot of rogues re-rolled from one spec into another with this very powerful new spec, and there was not really a point of testing a lot of Assassination. I mean, most people just wanted to see results-oriented gameplay and play what's popular, so there wasn't enough people, I feel like, on the beta that really tried to play Assassination and give it a lot of the feedback. It did get some of the must-needed changes like Slice and Dice giving you energy, which really does amplify the playstyle, and with higher haste numbers it's going to feel a lot better, but I feel like it's just one of those things that's a downfall of the spec because another popular kid on the block is around. But if it's not an issue of tuning, gear is definitely going to help the spec out. Higher haste numbers, higher mastery numbers, higher critical strike numbers are all going to make it better. Haste will give you more energy, more attacks, so that's more auto attacks, more poison applications on the enemy, but also more ticks of your dots, which reverses back into energy, so it's just kind of like a continuous loop. Critical strikes allow you more combo points to build up, so as we get more crit compared to the end of Battle for Azeroth, where we had some insane crit numbers, especially with Blood of the Enemy Essence, we might be able to take advantage at a later time with massive combo point building that the spec can grow off of. And of course there's Mastery for big, punchy, big poison damage or massive bleeds that just tear through your enemy over time. All those stats are going to help the spec out, and that can only be done with better gear. Once we get into arenas, once we get into raids and mythic pluses, this is where the spec could potentially shine. And I say all this about a spec that actually isn't in that bad of a spot. I know not everybody's playing the spec, but it doesn't mean that it's completely dead in the water either. Assassination Effect does have some advantages that could be very helpful going into the next raid tier. First of all, this is a spec about bleeds and poisons. Bleeds and poisons have very much a damage over time aspect to them. That means this spec has probably the least amount of impact when it comes to not always being able to hit the boss. Outlaw needs uptime, but with uptime you also need to be able to dance around mechanics. And if there's a lot of mechanics where you simply just can't even tag the boss for long periods of time, you lose out on damage. Subtlety is a little bit less in such a way, because as long as you get your burst, you'll get majority of the damage out, but still, if you're not able to get the sustained damage out, which is going to be a good portion going into this expansion, you are also going to lose significant portion of the damage. As Assassination, you put dots on an enemy, and if let's say you need to get behind a wall for a line of sight mechanic, which is going to help happen a couple times for a couple bosses inside of this brand new raid Castle Nathria, your dots continue ticking on the enemy. So you can play mechanics and pay attention to mechanics. As long as your dots are preset on the boss, you do have at least a good portion of your damage on them, allowing you a little bit of that freedom. When it comes to damage over time, we can also talk about the cleave potential, especially when enemies are quite a distance from each other. Outlaw needs enemies to be next to each other for blade flurry cleaving, and subtlety in some sense also likes enemies closely compacted together. But when it comes to enemies that are kind of a distance apart, maybe not super far, but not close enough where you can get the value of your AoE, this is where Assassination also shines. Which is another thing that's actually we're going to see in the mechanics. So if you need that Affliction, Warlock style of doing dots on two enemies that are kind of a distance away, or even three, Assassination does have that advantage over the other two specs. Assassination is also a spec that's fairly good at AoE. It's not quite like Outlaw in terms of the burst, but in terms of sustain, because Outlaw has to play off of cooldowns in order to maintain their AoE, Assassination can spam Phantom Knives, dot up enemies, Crimson Tempest all over them. With the right talent setup, you will have great sustain in a closely packed scenario. And of course Vendetta continues to be a very strong cooldown either way. So as a class with that punchy damage, I think we are going to be in a good spot. So overall, Assassination doesn't really seem like a bad spec, but it does feel like something is missing, one small thing. I can't really put my finger on it, whether it is maybe tuning from Blizzard's end and the Assassination spec is simply just a little under-tuned. Maybe it's the lack of endgame gear. Maybe you actually need the best gear in the world in order to be competitive. Or maybe it's going to be scaling at a later time. So maybe not with this raid in Mythic Plus season you're going to see the spec shine, but in a raid or two, you'll see the spec scarily evolve out of nowhere, just dominating the charts. I won't say the spec is in a bad spot, and I can't even meme on it, because it's not in a bad place at all. It's just not quite in a perfect place. It's kind of sort of there. It needs something extra, and I sometimes just have a hard time putting my finger on the pulse of what exactly this spec needs in order to realize its full potential. But that's going to be my video on Assassination Rogues and where they're at right now. A lot of you guys have asked me with concerns about this spec. Is it really in a bad spot? I feel like if you're someone who's enjoying Assassination, you can still get a lot of value out of it. I think Covenant choices is going to make a big difference. A hero, the Necrolord, makes the playstyle a lot easier, especially with the extra comm points you can get. But play whatever Covenant you want. They are all very, very close to one another for this spec. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed this update on Assassination Rogues. I'm hoping we see a lot more Assassination Rogues in the near future, maybe with these Tuesday, Wednesday, or this week's updates. And I'll see all of you guys in another video.